Time for a couple more questions. Just walk up to the microphone.
Thank you. Much of the power of witness is in the ability of Whittaker Chambers to give us a bright line between treason and loyalty to one's country, and between materialism and idealism or faith. If part of this discussion is what enduring lessons we can get from this great book, one looks now for where the bright line can be drawn today. We seem to have a dimmer line between the various forms of political radicalism that President Obama is heir to, and the arguments now failed in this last election of conservatives that those things represent a legacy that the American polity should reject. Norman has given us an idea that American greatness can be reasserted. Al Regnery has given us 4 principles of the American constitutional order, and you've called for a principle of moderation. Do any of those add up to another bright line of the kind that Whittaker Chambers was able to draw for us and thus seed American conservatism?
Well, I think you pose a very, very difficult problem. The bright line that Chambers drew did not hold all that firmly even then. There were violent arguments about what constituted patriotism or loyalty. Nobody argued that espionage was a good thing, but the accusation was always made that all this stuff was an attempt to discredit liberalism and the New Deal. We now have, in our own time, we've heard it said, not since Obama was in office, but that the dissidence is the highest form of patriotism. I don't buy that. I don't buy it at all. And of course, the Democrats no longer say that. You know, where I would draw I hardly dare tell you where I would draw the bright line. Federal marshals will materialize out of the walls and lock me up immediately. Well, I was delicately suggesting that even Whittaker Chambers, who was a great man, and I think Witness is a very great book, but that even Whittaker Chambers fell into what I consider the misguided view of America that is prevalent, not so prevalent, but it has always existed on the right. And I would draw a bright line between understanding the precious value and virtues of this society, even, by the way, now, and denigrating it. Which he did quite consistently. John Gaddis said that he saw a lot in common between Chambers and Kennan. Oddly enough, I've been rereading Witness for the 3rd time, I think, and I said to my wife last night, you know, Chambers has a lot in common with George Kennan. And when I said this to Professor Gaddis, I think he's left, he said, well, of course, they were both deeply patriotic. And I said, no, they weren't. I mean, I don't think they were traitors or anything, but neither one of them had a real appreciation for the greatness and value and virtue of this country. And they had a lot in common in the sense they both, you know, wanted to farm, and they hated cities, and they thought there was something wrong with success and material comfort. You were more virtuous if you had old clothes rather than new clothes. This is actually what Chambers believed. And he was chided for this by Alger Hiss, who told him he should dress better. So I draw a line between people who are genuinely pro-American and those who aren't, and that gets me into a lot of trouble. And as I say, I hardly dare develop the idea, even in this company.
We have time for, I think, one more question. If there is one more question. Yes, sir.
Wear out my welcome. I've got to thank the panelists first because the breaking of a vow allows me to break my vow never to use one of these forums to make a statement, but I couldn't resist. I think the more or less government argument is a dead end for conservatives. And the reason is it plays to the liberal frame without addressing the fundamental factors that drive public demand for government services, which are connected to the complexity of society and rapid technological change. Because rulemaking, as Eleanor Ostrom has demonstrated in her work, is an effort to stabilize expectations about the future. And the way out is to think about governance, because governance is about the things that government does that helps people stabilize their expectations about the future and manage the risks that come from living in uncertain times. And avoidance of this concept called the government. The government does this, the government does that. That is the reified state, which is the hubristic statement about the absence of God, of society without God. The government becomes the idol. And so what I would suggest for the conservatives who really want to restore this notion of the original principles of limited government is to focus on teaching the science of association, Tocqueville's mother science, and that teaching the science of association will give people access to the technology of rulemaking that allows governance to be conducted in the little platoons that make up society. And I would welcome any thoughts or comments the panelists have on that. And I thank Professor Berkowitz for raising that issue.
Your question? Give it a shot. Of course, I agree with the last part of your remarks, which is that we should do what is in our power to encourage Burke's little platoons, this Tocqueville science of association, because these are the real schools of virtue: family, religious community, political associations of all sorts. But I can't agree with your advice that we stop thinking about limited government. I think it's extremely important that we be mindful. In fact, I think the two ideas are connected. It's extremely important we be mindful of those tasks that government, one, is permitted to do under the Constitution. It's partly a legal question. It's also a practical question. We have to think about those tasks that government is competent at doing. And third, and I'm really making Tocquevillian points, third, we have to think about those tasks that government could do, but we'd be better off, could legally do, might even do fairly well, but we'd all be better off if we did them for ourselves. So my medium-length answer, a summary of my medium-length answer is that we need to think very carefully about both the principles of limited government and about the science of association.
Look, everything you say is true, but the fact of the matter is that we are engaged in a great political war, political ideological war, which is not always identified as such. We have a president who, unfortunately, has been reelected, who, as we all know, promised before he was first elected, 5 days before, to radically transform this country. And we know pretty well into what he wishes to transform it. We say politely a facsimile of the social democratic systems, regimes of Western Europe. That's the least of it. I mean, that would be the minimal strategic objective of our president and his administration. And so limited government, yes, and we have to think about what we can do and can't do, you know, like AA. I mean, but I think we have to bear in mind that though we lost this last battle on November 6th, the war is by no means over. On the contrary, and I think that unless we keep it in focus, unless we keep reminding ourselves that the stakes in this particular war are about as great as they can be, we're going to lose. And it's got nothing to do with whether there's another regulation of the banks or you know, whether taxes go up on the rich or don't go up on the rich. I don't say these are unimportant, but they're tactical or intermediate measures involved in a strategic objective that I think Barack Obama is very clear about and is determined to pursue, and God help us, may yet succeed in doing.
When I said that was the last question, I meant the last except for Linda Bridges.
I just wanted to add briefly, in commenting on what Norman said about those who love America and those who don't love America, I'd like to add a quote from Bill Buckley, showing that how much you can love America and still notice the flaws. And it's the line from the Genesis of Blackford Oaks, in which he says, "This country of ours, so crazy and mixed up much of the time, and yet still worth everything to defend."
Well, of course it has flaws. Everything has flaws. Everything human has flaws. The question is what you emphasize. And what has been emphasized in our culture for, well, 40 years now, with increasing intensity, is the flaws. I mean, you've got several generations of kids who have been educated to believe that this country stinks, that it was born in sin and has continued to pursue evil objectives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's why I keep harping on this issue. I still think it is the major issue facing us, and conservatives, at least of not all stripes, I have to say, are the only force in the country that can be relied upon to at least I think, stop it. This particular history, I think we can yell stop, and I think we can succeed because we can draw on the deepest resources of this country's tradition to fight it. And but if we don't, nobody else will, and the battle will be lost.
Well, let me just bring it back to Whittaker Chambers also. And the fact that it looks like a losing battle doesn't mean you don't do it. When Chambers confronted communism, he wasn't only confronting communism, as he said, he was confronting the entire American establishment. Everything was against him, and I'm sure it looked to him, well, he said so in Witness very clearly, that it was something he couldn't imagine that he was going to succeed, but he did it anyway. He had the courage to do what he did, and in each of those steps, I mean, testifying was an enormously courageous thing to do. When Hiss challenged him to make the accusation that he was a spy outside of congressional privilege, he went on to CBS and did it again. I mean, enormous courage, and ultimately he prevailed, and I think that's a lesson that we can all learn.
Yeah, I just, look, God forbid I should be thought to be denigrating Whittaker Chambers. He was a great man, and Witness is a great book. But I do think that he never dropped the other shoe, and that this weakened his own fight against communism. Rereading Witness, I've been struck by how much he resisted seeing America as good. You can say relatively good. He said that communism was absolute evil. Okay, and I believe that. And I would not say that America represents absolute good, but I think it's pretty damn good compared to anything else.
Well, I'd like to thank the panelists for a pretty damn good panel. Intermittently melancholy though it was.